Okay. Hello. Happy lunch, everyone. Jillian Graber, Protect PT. And I want to thank you for joining us with our Lunch and Learn today. Today we have Ben Hunkler with us from ORVI. So we're going to be talking about a couple different reports, but Ben, his role at ORVI is to be a community advocate working in the Ohio River Valley. He offers communication and design support for report releasing, social media content, and the ORVI Insider. So thanks for joining us today, Ben.
Thanks for having me, Jillian. Yeah, I'm really excited to chat with you and with you all about a couple new reports that ORVI just released last month.
Yeah, so ORVI is the Ohio River Valley Institute. So Ben, do you want to just tell us really quickly about ORVI's mission?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Cool.
So ORVI was founded actually just about a year ago in August of 2020 to combat pro-industry narratives about fracking economics and petrochemicals in the region. We're trying to dispel the notion that fracking and the natural gas boom have brought local prosperity to eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, among other things. We also publish research about abandoned mine lands, orphan oil and gas wells, but we're broadly focused on energy economics, promoting clean energy, and again, just kind of combating fracking and natural gas narratives.
Great. And so we're here today to talk about a couple reports that came out that I thought were really interesting. I mean, when you first talked about this, I was like, this would make a great lunch and learn, really to broadly tell people about the work that ORVI does and these reports. And we have some slides here. I hope you all can see them. It should be pretty good size in the YouTube, but we're gonna go ahead to, I think if I click on this, I'll be able to go to the different slides here. And then I realize I don't have your name in here like I do mine, so I'm gonna go ahead and add that too.
Cool.
Um, I thought this was, wait, give me 1 second. Whoop. There's Ben. Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
I've got multiple screens up. It's a little crazy over here.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That's great. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Jillian. This is just the
Okay.
title slide.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
All right. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, sure. So, as you mentioned, we released a pair of reports last month written by Sean O'Leary, who's a senior researcher at the Ohio River Valley Institute. The first one is called Destined to Fail: Why the Appalachian Natural Gas Boom Failed to Deliver Jobs and Prosperity and What It Teaches Us. It's a pretty self explanatory title. But this report builds upon a previous report that we released back in February that quantified the failure of the natural gas boom to bring economic prosperity to the region. It was a pretty groundbreaking report, honestly. It received a lot of media attention. I've been writing an annual report for ORVI and looking into some of the numbers, and we found that it received more than 91 individual media mentions, both in the region and nationally. So it has certainly made waves, we think, in the way that people think about fracking in the region. A lot of folks who live here know that you can see the fact that despite what industry proponents may say about the natural gas boom and about how it has really changed the economic structure of the area, we can see that the prosperity they claimed would come hasn't really occurred. And the second report we're going to talk about today is an exciting one called the Centralia Model for Economic Transition in Distressed Communities. And this one presents what we think is a model for economic development that is transferable to communities in the Ohio River Valley that are still suffering the effects of the natural gas boom, that are, whose economies are struggling and who are looking for a place to turn, particularly as the nation begins to transition to clean energy sources.
Yeah, and we already have some comments coming up. Thanks everyone for joining us. Hello, Lois. Hello, Marin. Marin says, "Wow, it's just a year ago, ORVI has already accomplished so much." So that's great. And thanks, Marin, for joining us today. So let me see if there's any. The slides are rather tiny. Okay, so I can try to make them a little bigger. It'll it'll get here. I'll just put them on top of my face.
That's
There we
great.
go. So people can see them better because we wanted people to see the slides and not really necessarily me. So when we talk about the economic prosperity that the industry promised, can you tell us a couple things that you think are some of those like out that those standout things that they promised and what the report tells us?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you could actually switch to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So before I answer your question, Jillian, just a little bit of context. So both the report released in February and this one we released last month look specifically at what Sean, the report's author, calls the Appalachian counties. And these are the 22 counties in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania outlined in this image. And they were selected because they produce more than 90% of the region's natural gas. So this is really where the fracking boom has been concentrated since 2008. But Jillian, to answer your question, so in 2008, there were two economic impact studies that were commissioned by the American Petroleum Institute. The first of which was published by Timothy Considine, and another one was published by John Kleinhans. And these reports claimed that the natural gas boom would bring more than 450,000 new direct jobs, as well as indirect jobs, which includes things like hospitality, hotels for gas workers to stay in, transportation, shipping natural gas to and from different places. And that's really a staggering number. There was a local elected official who claimed that the region would have more jobs than people following the natural gas boom, which is kind of outlandish. But again, these are numbers that were published and sanctioned by the American Petroleum Institute. So you have to, again, of course, you have to come with them with a little bit of skepticism. But yeah, so to answer your question, this is what folks expected of the natural gas boom. This is what was published in kind of corroborated economically in these analyses. It's what was trumpeted by local elected officials who really hyped up the promise of the natural gas boom and talked about how much economic change and prosperity it would deliver to these counties and the local economies that had, frankly, been economically distressed for a long time.
Yeah, so we hear a lot. I mean, the jobs are really the industry's hook of this is what we're bringing to the table. Um, and so, for those who have been living in the oil and gas shale fields for the last 10 or plus years, how has it affected the small towns in this Fragalacha region?
Yeah. So if you could switch to the next slide, we've got a chart on here that can help explain what's going on here.
Cool.
So, for all intents and purposes, the natural gas boom really should have brought economic prosperity to the region, according to these reports, because production actually exceeded expectations. More gas was produced than even these industry proponents claimed there would be. And as you can see in this chart, I hope you can see it okay, but from 2008 to 2019, which is the beginning of the natural gas boom to right before COVID started, economic output in the Appalachian counties, which is represented in this yellow bar here in the left economic contributions box, grew at 3 times the national rate. So here you can see that the nation's GDP grew by What is it? 19.2%. And the Appalachian counties grew by more than 60. Um, so again, it seems like if you just look at the left side of this chart that the Frackalachia region was doing great. Um, but if you look at the right hand side, you can see the economic results of the fracking boom. And again, so here are the national averages on represented by the blue columns in each of these three sectors. So and on the right is the Appalachian counties as compared to their states as a whole in red. Um, but you can see that while personal income grew by 21.9% in the nation, Appalachia's was just about 2/3 of that. Jobs was one job growth was 1.6% in the Appalachian counties compared to nearly 10% nationally, and population in the Appalachian counties actually fell.
Wow.
Right. So it's really striking the discrepancy between the economic contributions of Appalachia and the reality on the ground.
So these are all things that are kind of negatives and things that pretty much track with people that live in fracking counties understand. I think that one of the things that we tell our local officials all the time is that nobody wants to live around fracking. Nobody wants to
Right.
live around the noise, the pollution, the truck traffic. So it would make sense that the population's decreasing. And it's interesting that to see like kind of compared to the rest of these areas or other areas, how things have changed. So personal income, as compared to the rest of. And is this the rest of the nation? I'm sorry, it's really small.
Yeah, that's right.
Great. All right. And Mary said that she was going to send the slides too. So if you want slides, just email
Great.
Mary at protectpt.org and she'll go ahead and send the slides to you. I think it's really important information for politicians, especially that maybe are thinking, well, we need to have fracking because fracking is going to cause economic growth, and it's really important to have economic growth in our communities. Um, but what would you say to those politicians who have that narrative, you really from the industry, that are following the industry's narrative on that? What would you say to them, Ben?
So actually, we have met with several county commissioners, city councilors in the region. We've brought them this data, and frankly, it's pretty irrefutable. When you present this to these county commissioners, this information is derived directly from the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So there's no economic modeling here. This is essentially just narrativizing and quantifying exactly what happened to the industry. And we found that, when we bring this information before elected officials, even natural gas industry proponents have to agree with us. Um, they, even if you're a fan of the industry, even if you think the industry is great, you can't deny the fact that these 22 counties have gotten a bad deal from natural gas. They've Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. You continue.
I was just going to say that they've given their resources, they've sacrificed public health, they've sacrificed their environment for the natural gas industry, and it's taken everything, and they haven't received much in return. And again, so when we bring this before elected officials, we've pretty seriously convinced a lot of folks who before the meeting stood on the other side, who are fans of the natural gas industry, but simply just can't deny the facts, the data.
So when you met with these elected officials, did they talk about the sacrifice to public health and their concern about that? Because I talk to sometimes I talk to elected officials. It's not often, but especially when folks are pro industry, and jobs is one thing that they point to. And if that is taken off the table, if jobs and economic growth is taken off the table, and what you said about sacrificing public health, um, is how do they reconcile that with their constituents and with with what they now know.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, as you just said, for many of the folks who are in favor of the industry, public health and the environment just aren't as large of concerns as jobs and the economy.
Hmm.
Um, and that's really kind of what we see as the niche, both of this report and of ORVI as a whole, is kind of corroborating folks' experience with the public health impacts and the environmental impacts of fracking with jobs and economic data. Because for some people, that's really the only way to speak to them about this issue, or at least to convince them to, change their opinion of natural gas and fracking, is to really try to combat this prevailing narrative that fracking is the engine of job creation in the region.
And has Orvie done any kind of data analysis or research on what the kind of health expense, the economic health expense is to the people that live in this region?
So ORVI has not yet.
Okay.
There are a couple of folks on our advisory board, Nick Moeller at Carnegie Mellon University, who published a study a few years ago that does try to quantify the externalized costs of natural gas. And that's actually a great resource that I could send to Mary and maybe have her circulate it to the
Yeah.
audience. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. And actually, that sounds like a really good lunch and learn to follow up on this conversation,
Yeah, no kidding.
talking about that side of it.
Hmm.
We've got some really great questions in the chat. I want to
Sure.
talk with this one first, and then we'll go to the next one. And this because this one was up first. Uh, but we are transitioning, worried about money going to carbon capture and storage. Do you want to talk at all about that?
Sure. Yeah. So the question of are we transitioning is a great one, and I think that's one that is still in the process of being answered, hopefully sooner rather than later. But the follow up report that I'll talk about later in this presentation does provide a model for transition that we think and hope could be replicable in the Ohio River Valley and for communities in western Pennsylvania and across the region. Um, and it is something that this model is focused almost entirely on energy efficiency measures, clean energy, and re-education programs. And in this community in Washington State that we'll talk about in a minute, it's had really astounding effects.
Interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
we have another question too. Is there data or from labor statistics, or I guess any other data that would indicate the loss of active farming? I think that's a good question.
That is a great question. Yeah. So we do have some data that kind of quantifies the growth of the natural gas industry in the region, and the growth of natural gas has come at the cost of other industries. And I apologize, I don't know offhand about the loss of active farming, or I don't know any numbers, but we have found that as the fracking industry has expanded in the region, other industries, including farming, have diminished.
Yeah, because just for folks that might not know, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times, farming really takes a hit when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to putting a pad there instead of an active farm. I know
Absolutely.
that farmers have seen fracking in the past as a way to be able to either upgrade equipment where
Mm-hmm.
in their industry where they're not making a lot of money, especially smaller
Mm-hmm.
independent farmers, because of large agriculture really taking over. But a lot of I know a lot of local farmers are like, well, I need to pay my taxes on my land, and this is something, and
Exactly.
they're not actively farming it, or they are, and they think, well, I can just carve out a little bit of space for this one well pad, and it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be fine. I'm going to be able to
Mm-hmm.
pay for the equipment upgrades that I need, and then that really, and I'm not sure if this report covers this, or if another report by ORVI, but that really kind of makes other challenges come bubble up. where if a farmer, has a well pad on their property and then their water is contaminated, uh,
Hmm.
or their soil is contaminated, you know, do, is there any kind of analysis that you know of that kind of speaks to that, that loss of economic growth for the individual farmer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on a more macroscopic level, I would again refer folks to Nick Muller's study about the externalized costs of fracking, to look more closely at the environmental effects of the natural gas industry. But what this report does cover is the folks who lease their mineral rights to the fracking industry, the farmers who sold their mineral rights to construct well pads on their farmland. And in many cases, those folks' royalty checks have been much, much, much smaller than they were anticipated to be. So there are lots of individuals who have, they've signed a lease with the natural gas industry. They've expected to get these huge returns. They went out and purchased new farming equipment. They maybe bought some more land. They, made a down payment or invested money somewhere. And then the kind of the stream of royalty checks that they were expecting turned into a trickle. And many folks just haven't really seen what they were promised. Um, I just read a great article this morning that I can also circulate to you all. That a reporter went out and interviewed several landowners in eastern Ohio about their experience leasing their land to the natural gas industry, and they talked about the fact that they expected to get rich, they expected to become millionaires from leasing their land, and many of them, somebody bought a vacation home in Myrtle Beach, and now they just had to, they can't afford it, they had to sell it, and they're just really economically struggling right now because they were essentially lied to by the natural gas industry.
Well, and I think that we see that kind of echoed in, either whether it's hotels or small
Mm-hmm.
restaurants where they've increased their capacity, maybe they've increased
Mm-hmm.
their number of staff when fracking came to town, but then ultimately they leave.
Mm-hmm.
The workers leave. The jobs that have been created then leave, and the economic, prosperity, um, leaves too, with that. And then the hotel owner, the restaurant owner is who's maybe invested in their business in order to accommodate this new boom, then is left with kind of what it was before, the norm,
Mm-hmm.
what the small town was experiencing before all this influx of activity.
Exactly.
I think that that's kind of like what we see in a boom and bust industry. We see this, you've got your boom, but then your bust is it's really difficult for the people that live uh,
Right.
in the community.
And that's what we're experiencing right now. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Well, and we have another comment from Patricia. She says, will this info be shared with the Penn Township commissioners? Patricia, I think that's a great question, and we can certainly share it with Penn Township commissioners. Ben, maybe we could ask you to contact them on our behalf and share the information with them. It seems like so many elected officials are just so skeptical about
Mm-hmm.
this, about any like articles shared, well, how do
Yeah.
we know that research, well, they could look it up themselves, right? They could do the research
Right.
themselves, but
Right.
here's it like on a silver platter.
Exactly.
Essentially, you guys have done the research, right? And with the statistics that they could find themselves, it's just a matter of analyzing the data,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right, exactly. And that's a large part of why we bill ourselves as kind of an independent and nonpartisan research organization, even though we do work really closely with advocacy groups like Protect PT and others, is because we really hope that our research can kind of corroborate, rather, folks' experience from afar. And we think that, by coming from a position of relative neutrality, we can start conversations with folks who might otherwise be opposed to what we're putting out.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate that because, there's so many times when it's like, well, show me the numbers. Well, show me the data. It's like, okay, well, here you
Mm-hmm.
go. Here's the data. So
Right.
yeah, we'll be happy to share that with any elected officials that want to read that and digest that. Um, let's.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to talk about with this slide about false promise?
Yeah, so this is just a more of a microscopic look at Pennsylvania and Westmoreland County in particular. Um, so I hope you all can see the numbers on this chart. I know it's pretty small, but again, this is just kind of a comparison between the natural gas counties as well as Westmoreland County and a couple others in Pennsylvania and the national averages. So again, the United States personal income grew by more than 20%, jobs by nearly 10, and population by 8% from 2008 to 2019. Westmoreland County is on the far right, so you can see that Westmoreland's personal income grew by less than 5%, and both jobs and population actually fell by 1.6%, while the nations were rising. Um, so yeah, the more you look into, isolated the more you isolate county level data, the more you see these trends, the more apparent and obvious they are. That while the nation went through a period of growth, the fracking counties, which produce more than 90% of the region's national gas, really struggled.
Yeah. So we have a comment. Maybe it's a question. The commissioners cannot stop it from happening. Again, though, um, we still can't legally keep them out. So I think it's kind of a question and a comment. So you're right. We can't really. There are laws in Pennsylvania that say that you have to allow for reasonable oil and gas development. And
Right.
I always argue, well, what is reasonable? Because certainly the hundreds of conventional wells, if not thousands of conventional wells in small towns like mine, I would think that would be reasonable development already. On top of it, we've got 12 proposed pads, uh, proposed and producing pads. So, you know, it, what is considered reasonable? Where did local
Yeah.
officials draw the line
Right.
to kind of balance that public health sacrifice to what they think is going to be economic growth, or maybe economic growth is not why they made the decision. Maybe they make their decisions based on pressure, which we find a lot of times. Pressure from the industry. It's kind of what happened here in Penn Township, and I'm sure that's echoed in a lot of other communities as well. Um, so let me go to the next slide and tell us a little bit about this, Ben.
Sure. So this is kind of reiterating what we've talked about before. Frackalachia's economic output, if Frackalacha, the 22 counties that produce 90% of the region's natural gas, were a state, would be ranked ninth in the nation for GDP output. If Frackalacha were a state, their personal income would be 41st,
Hmm.
which is really astonishing. Most times, under most circumstances, GDP and personal income correlate really closely. You can see in these tables here that many of the states in DC ranked at the top of this list are the same, both in the GDP sector and in the per capita personal income sector. And that is because that oftentimes GDP translates into personal income.
Hmm.
And if you transition to the next slide, so this kind of charts the ratio of personal income to GDP both nationally and in the Frackalachian counties. So first, if you take a look at this gray line here, this is the national ratio of personal income to GDP. And as you can see, it's relatively constant from 2001 to 2019, and that is because both metrics are typically correlative in most circumstances. But if you look at the blue line at the bottom of the chart, this is the Frackalachia's mining sector. The mining sector is a BEA category that includes natural gas extraction. So it's essentially a proxy for the natural gas sector's share of GDP growth. And as the blue line increases, you can see that the red line, which is the Appalachian County's personal income to GDP ratio, or in other words, how much personal income local residents are getting as GDP increases, you can see that that line decreases in near lockstep with the mining sector, which includes natural gas. So essentially what this chart is saying is that the greater Frackalachia's reliance on fracking and natural gas extraction, the less personal income is realized per GDP growth. So people, as fracking grows, people get less money,
Mm.
essentially.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
and do you think that's because so when a well is first fracked,
Hmm.
80%, I think it is, 80% of the production of that well happens within the first year. And then
Hmm.
the production just plummets. From there, the only way to counteract that decrease in production a lot of times is to re-stimulate the well.
Hmm.
I know that, these well pads are really expensive. We're
They are.
talking about
Yep.
millions of dollars to build this pad, just for it to last a year in its highest production. That to me seems like it's bananas. Like, why would you invest that money just for a really, it's a short term payback? You know,
Absolutely.
do you think that's why
Absolutely.
this happens?
Yeah. So if you could advance to the next slide, this is kind of the synthesis of the first report that we released last month is exactly what you're talking about, Jillian, kind of delving into the reasons why natural gas hasn't produced economic prosperity. And yeah, I mean, the kind of uneven production is certainly a part of it, and so is the capital expenditure. These wells are incredibly expensive. And that capital expenditure comes at the cost of labor. So the first reason why we found natural gas is structurally incapable of creating economic prosperity is that natural gas and petchem are among the least labor-intensive sectors of the economy. That means that compared to other sectors, they create very few jobs per dollar invested, and that's exactly because most of the billions of dollars that have been invested in fracking, they go to constructing the drilling rigs, the compressor stations, the pipelines, rather than paying the salaries of the folks who operate them. And of the folks who do operate them, as I'm sure you all know or could have guessed, as many as 70% of the workers and suppliers hired by the industry come from places like Texas and Oklahoma. I'm sure you've seen Texas and Oklahoman license plates driving to and from these drill rigs.
Yep.
And when those folks are paid, most of their wages go back home to their home states. They don't stay in the local economy. They don't support local businesses and kind of help drive the economic prosperity that was forecasted in the region.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is something I hear all the time. And actually, so we were doing an event in Braddock last year.
Mm-hmm.
Was it last year? Maybe the year before. It was before COVID. um, and it was about the our reimagined Turtle Creek Watershed and Airshed
Mm-hmm.
Communities Plus initiative, and we were really excited because the New York Times said that they were going to come and interview folks for a podcast. Well, the interviews actually ended up being more about the election going on at the time and
Mm,
about how
gotcha.
Joe, what if Pennsylvanians are going to vote for Joe Biden, and
Right.
why would they vote for Joe Biden if he's potentially going to ban fracking, which he said he wasn't going
Mm-hmm.
to do, but That was the narrative at the time. And, it was interesting because the podcast, which is like, it's the New York Times podcast. I can't, maybe Mary can look it up. Um, but it actually had Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman on there
Mm-hmm.
and labor. There were a bunch of labor leaders from Pennsylvania that were on there, and they were like, well, this, any kind of ban on fracking is going to be a deal breaker for us because
Mm-hmm.
we know that the jobs,
Mm-hmm.
we need the
Mm-hmm.
jobs. And it was all about that. And it really upset me because I thought, if they only could see what we see on the ground, that the
Right.
jobs are here. And like you
Right.
said, people are coming from other states. It's not
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvanians getting
Mm-hmm.
jobs. It's
Mm-hmm.
not people in Ohio that are benefiting, or West Virginia. It's not people here that are benefiting from these jobs. These jobs are coming in from other states, and they're leaving. And they're leaving
Exactly.
in a wake of disaster, and it's just, so what do you like? I know we talked about politicians, but like, have
Mm-hmm.
you guys talked to the governor's office of, for Pennsylvania, or the lieutenant governor's office? Because I think I'd like to show him the slides, and show him how he's wrong, and these labor leaders, like, how they're wrong too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's we haven't spoken with the governor's office. We'd love to if we had an audience, honestly. Um, but to the earlier point that was made about kind of county commissioners' inability to really change things, we still feel it's important to meet with folks because we're working to shift public opinion and to just kind of lay these facts and statistics out in front of decision makers who, even though their authority is kind of preempted by the state legislature, it's important for them to know and to potentially petition their higher ups to make a change, to really recognize the fact that this industry isn't creating jobs in the region. And we have met with a couple of state senators in Pennsylvania, actually, and we've had some really great and we think productive conversations with some folks. And we really have seen the tide starting to shift a little bit. We ORVI came out with a poll that is unrelated to these two reports, but just last month that surveyed Pennsylvanians' perceptions of fracking in huge majorities across demographics, regardless of partisanship, regardless of age, gender. Just the outstanding majority of Pennsylvanians are opposed to fracking and want greater regulations at the very least. They want more restrictions on fracking. They're concerned about the air and water pollution resulting from fracking operations. And we really are starting to see folks become more cognizant and more oppositional to
Mhm.
the natural gas industry.
Did that poll talk at all about so you mentioned the regulations,
Mm-hmm.
because I think part of the problem is we have regulations, and the industry says
Mm-hmm.
we're so heavily regulated, but then it's up to the DEP's discretion whether they actually do that,
Right.
take action on those regulations or not. And then
Right.
the second part of that is, the industry gets a ton of, gifts from our government, essentially
Subsidies. Right. Right.
subsidies, where
Yeah.
they're getting money to
Mm-hmm.
really, from our perspective, from a community perspective, destroy our health. So they're getting money, they're getting our tax money to destroy our health. So did the polls talk at all about that?
Yeah. So your comment reminds me of the Penn Future study that came out earlier this year about how the fracking industry receives more than $4 billion in subsidies in Pennsylvania, which is just an outstanding amount. Yeah. Um, and so the poll doesn't have information about subsidies specifically, but it does show that majorities of Pennsylvanian voters support regulations like greater setback distances from wells. So essentially providing a greater buffer area between fracking wells and residences, and specifically schools and hospitals and places where kids and folks in poor health are living.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
can tell you that there's a well pad that's proposed less than a half mile from my house.
Oh
There's a
my gosh.
playground.
Yeah.
It's a mile
Oh
from
my god.
the elementary schools. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be surrounded by 4 well pads eventually. And yeah, and thousands of people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
this is we're talking about taking fracking from putting it just in rural communities to putting it
Mm-hmm.
into suburban communities,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we're talking about. And
It's
it's and
terrible.
so there you see the health impacts, that sacrifice that you talked about earlier. We're seeing
Mm-hmm.
that then just really quadrupled because of the amount of people that are
Exactly.
impacted. So it's just
Right.
it to me it just seems like that's nuts, but that's how it's going. Oh, and Mary found that episode for us of the daily. So if anybody
Great.
wants to look at that, wants to send this information to Lieutenant Governor Fetterman,
Please
as
do.
Chris
Yeah.
mentioned, he's actually running for Senate here in Pennsylvania. So would have, I would think, even more power to do something about fracking in Pennsylvania. He actually runs at the trail near my house, and I saw him outside running one time, and I said, "Hey, you know that you could run by your house," but he probably doesn't want to because his house is in Braddock, which is very polluted. And I
Jeez.
said, there's going to be 12 well pads near here, so this air is going to be polluted too. So if that's allowed to go forward, and he didn't know what
Terrible. Yeah.
to say to
Oh, I
that.
bet. Yeah.
It kind
You
of
got to
caught him
chase
off
him next
guard.
time, Julian. Yeah.
All right, tell us about this slide.
Sure. So this is where we delve into the second of the set of reports released in July. And this one goes over the Centralia model. So Centralia is in Washington State, near where our senior researcher Sean O'Leary has lived for a long time. It's an old coal town of about 18,000 people, and it's centered in Lewis County, which is a what we call a micropolitan area, essentially a kind of like a small town that has 80,000 residents. In 2006, Centralia lost the entire county's largest employer, which was a coal mine owned by the TransAlta Corporation. It had 600 employees, and 5 years later, it learned that the coal-fired power plant, which was also owned by TransAlta, would retire by 2025, and again shed 370 jobs. So that's nearly 1,000 jobs lost in a town of 18,000, which is really a kind of a staggering number. And for a time, this town was really scrambling to figure out what to do, how it was going to kind of weather this economic hit. But the town decided to take a proactive approach, and they partnered with the state government to negotiate a deal with the TransAlta Corporation, the owner of the coal mine and the power plant, to establish a $55 million transition fund. And the transition fund was comprised of 3 parts. The first of which was a weatherization fund, which works on, which is its funding allocated toward retrofitting homes and buildings with energy efficiency upgrades. There's an economic and community development fund that's focused primarily around education, retraining programs for the coal workers and for their families, which is pretty critical, as well as an energy technology fund that puts money into clean energy development, wind and solar, as well as other energy efficiency measures like retrofits and things like that.
This is
And this
really
here is a map of Centralia. Yeah.
this is interesting. So they're taking a proactive approach. So
Mm-hmm.
could this be duplicated in Ohio or Pennsylvania or West Virginia?
We think that it could, and particularly because of the circumstance in which most of Appalachia finds itself in right now, which is that there are huge amounts of federal funding on the table as part of the Biden administration's infrastructure plan that are allocated specifically to economic justice communities. And many of the coal towns that look a lot like Centralia, but are located in the Ohio River Valley, are eligible for these large grants to pursue things exactly like energy efficiency measures, clean energy funding. So the money is really on the table. Right now, we think that it's just a question of political will, of changing minds, and of convincing folks that not only will this transition benefit communities in the long run, it's something that we should start working toward right now. And if we don't, we're going to miss this opportunity for federal funding.
Yeah, and I think that it seems like a huge opportunity to miss. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we actually have solar panels on our home, and even though our home was not the most productive, place,
Mm-hmm.
because of the way that our home is oriented, where the sun is, we have trees, lots of tree cover. So, but we did it anyway, and it's made a huge,
Mm-hmm.
benefit to our family economically. And it's interesting because I often think if all of my neighbors did the same thing, and also at the same time looked at how they could weatherize, how they could
Mm-hmm.
just really upgrade their home with better windows, better insulation, how much better, how much
Yeah.
less energy you know, we'd be, pulling from the grid.
Mm-hmm.
And in Pennsylvania, you don't get the benefit of solar like you do in other states. And I just think it's crazy
Yeah.
to not have the benefits go directly to the people
Mm-hmm.
who could be making this energy, who could be taking action individually. There's because there's a very little incentive. Um, I know, like in contrast, I when I went to Maryland to visit family, I'd see tons of solar panels everywhere.
Definitely. Yeah.
And it was exciting to see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it seems like this is something that if we had the political will to do, we could do it and benefit our state.
That's
Um,
absolutely right. Yeah, and this so the weatherization fund does include matched contributions for individuals or families, landowners who want to place solar panels on their house. So it really makes yeah, weatherizing your house, it makes it affordable, and it
yeah,
makes it yeah, it just prioritizes it. And as this graph demonstrates, the results of this program have been really astounding. So funding was first allocated in 2015, and you can see on this graph in the kind of the red shaded rectangle, this represents the coal transition grant period. So the kind of the beginning to present day of how these grants were allocated. And you can see the blue bars represent Centralia, and the red bars represent the United States. Um, Centralia was lagging behind the U.S. in terms of employment growth for several years, but nearly as soon as the transition grant funding started being allocated, um, their employment growth nearly doubled the U.S. almost every year following. So between 2015 and 2019, the area's GDP grew at twice the rate of U.S. GDP. Job growth rose to nearly twice the national average. Wages also rose about double the national average, and the population grew as well. Um, and so, just really striking results and really quickly, too. And in this next slide, I'll kind of go into the reasons why this model has been so effective. So, first off, the energy efficiency, and education sectors in which much of the grant money is concentrated they're really labor intensive compared to natural gas and petrochemicals. They create 2 to 3 times as many jobs per dollar invested as the mining and utility sectors. And many of these workers, especially in energy efficiency, which includes things like HVAC repair, door and window installation, lighting and insulation, um, are locally based. They're folks who are already in Centralia, and who can really take action immediately to start weatherizing these homes. And by nature of this grant program, they can expand their operations as well. They can hire local folks to get started on these energy efficiency upgrades, which can happen overnight. Jillian, if one of your neighbors wanted to install solar panels on her house tomorrow, they could do so. This is something that's really actionable, that doesn't require a lot of capital investments beforehand to get started. And we say that it's shovel ready because it always is. You can start on it tomorrow.
Yeah, I know that that's a huge barrier for people.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody can afford. I mean, we saved for I think a year to be able to afford the solar panels,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's really great that you have this model that you can provide. We do have a question from Aaron. How did Centralia compel the company to pony up 57K per employee? Is TransAlta participating in the transition, perhaps receiving to work, um, back to work toward becoming an energy company? It's a really good question, Aaron. Versus just
That
a
is a
fossil
great
fuel company.
yeah. That is a great question, and the negotiation complex was or the negotiation process was pretty complex. Um, so the deal itself was kind of facilitated by the governor of Washington State because Centralia's coal-fired power plant is one of the largest emitters of pollution in the state. So the state government did have a vested interest in kind of retiring this plant as soon as possible. Um, but TransAlta did as well because they were losing money on the plant. It wasn't being profitable, and they kind of wanted to get it off their hands, offload it because it wasn't producing returns. It was actually costing them money. So essentially, the governor of Washington was the one who kind of precipitated this meeting between Centralia and the town. As Sean describes it, she essentially threw representatives from the corporation and from Lewis County into a room over a weekend and gave them 3 days to figure out a deal. And that's that's essentially how this entire project was created. Um, but there are a couple of examples of similar coal plants. One in Moundsville, West Virginia, the Moundsville coal-fired power plant, that is also kind of in the process of retiring. There's currently an ongoing hearing that is being led by the Public Service Commissions of Kentucky and West Virginia to decide whether to accelerate the Moundsville coal plant's retirement from 2040 up to 2025, excuse me. And Sean, the author of these reports, actually testified at that hearing to essentially demonstrate the fact that Moundsville could undergo the same process as Centralia and see the same kinds of economic returns by negotiating a similar sort of economic transition plan with the company.
That's really cool. And you know what?
Yeah.
There's actually a power plant near us here in Pittsburgh
Hmm.
that's being retired, the Teswick power plant.
Yeah, right.
I'm just like, why can't we do the same thing?
Exactly. Exactly.
We've had the loss of jobs from,
Hmm.
from coal. We're seeing the devastation from fracking, and now we have a coal
Hmm.
plant that's retiring. Why don't we replace it with something better? Why don't we do something like this? It just makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe we need to talk with Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, who's running for state senate, and also I don't know if we'd
Yeah.
actually be able to talk to Governor Wolf because he's pretty what's the word, elusive. we
We
took
can try though.
we could
Yeah.
try.
Yeah.
We took a bunch of kids to Harrisburg a couple years ago, and
Yeah.
Fleeb, huh?
Hmm.
He snuck in the back door because he didn't want
No
to talk to them.
way.
My
Oh
son was
man.
really mad about that.
Oh, I'm sure.
because he wanted to talk
Jeez.
to him. The kids finally did get a chance to talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that this really highlights the fact that this is the future for our children. This is the future for
Exactly.
our
Yeah.
state, for
Mm-hmm.
the region, for the tri-state region. And I know, Ben, you and I talk a lot about waste and
Yeah.
the barging of waste on the Three Rivers,
Mm-hmm.
and how detrimental that can be. Yet, we keep seeing these other types of ways that our public health can be harmed from
Right.
this fossil fuel industry, and it just seems to make more sense to really talk more about an energy transition, and not one that includes other types of environmental
Exactly.
harms, like
Mm-hmm.
what is being proposed with carbon capture and storage.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are a lot of folks that are doing a lot of great different types of media on that subject, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert on that, but there's definitely some good information out there if anybody's interested. I know
Absolutely.
the Better Path Coalition did something. I guess it was last month on that, so folks can check that out. And Mary wants to remind everybody. I would like to remind everybody too to make sure you take our survey. We want to know what people want to see. We want to know what guests or what information people want. When it pertains to unconventional gas development or fossil fuel industry in general,
Mm-hmm.
and our public health, because this is something we live every day. So we
Absolutely.
want to hear from you, and we want for you to take our survey, let us know how we're doing, and let us know what we can do in the future to bring more stuff to you. And we are definitely going to contact. Is it Nick Mueller from CMU? Maybe he can come.
I'll send that report. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Our next lunch and learn, that would be really
Mm-hmm.
awesome. And our next lunch and learn will be next month. It's always the last Thursday of the month, or I'm sorry, last Tuesday of the month.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be, I don't know what that date is off the top of my head, but in September, the last Tuesday at noon. So please join us. Thank you, Ben, for giving us such great information.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the conversation and thank you for the questions. They were great ones.
Yeah, yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
thank to our guests for interacting with us. I think we love
Mm-hmm.
this platform because we can see all the guest questions. We can ask them straight away to our guest, and Patricia says thank you, very informative, Ben. And so we want to thank everyone for joining us today on our lunch and learn. Share this with your politicians. Share this with other people in your community so they can understand that we're not seeing in Pennsylvania the job growth that was
Mm-hmm.
promised from the industry. And let's start working towards a transition to energy, a better energy future. And thank you so much, Ben, for the work that ORVI does.
Thank
It's really
you.
awesome.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And do
All
check
right.
out the next Lunch and Learn. Colin Jarelmack is great. I just finished his book and it's really fascinating.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's tonight. That's tonight. Our book
Oh, I'm
event.
sorry. That's tonight. Yeah,
Yes.
go to that as
Yes.
well.
I know. So go to protectpt.org
Yeah.
/events, and we
Mm-hmm.
have a great discussion tonight with
Mm-hmm.
Colin Jarelmack. Yeah. So we're going to be discussing. I know we're like we've got 2 minutes, right? So tonight we're going to be discussing this. It's called Up to Heaven, Down to Hell, and it's really the social. Really, the sociology behind what it's like to live in Appalachia, in
Mm-hmm.
fracking communities, and really kind of the social dynamics. It's such a great book. So if
It
you
really is.
haven't read
Yeah.
it, read it. And we have a coupon code for folks that want to get the book. Join us anyway, even if you haven't read it. Just join us tonight, and it's at 6:30 tonight. Mary can post the link in the chat. She already did. It's at 6:30 tonight, and so we're going to be back here. We I I'm I think we're going to post it also on our YouTube. I'm not sure, but it's better
Cool.
to join the live event because then you can ask them questions. Um, and he is one of the community members is going to join us too. Ralph, one of the people that's featured in the book. So that should be really cool. Yeah, if you haven't read the book, you can still join us. You can read the book after, and you'll be, able to really understand, some of the things that the author was talking about. So, yeah, thanks so much, Ben. Great seeing you. Um,
Thank you. Good to see
and
you too.
yeah, hopefully we see you again tonight. Great.
Perfect.
Have a good day,
Thanks.
everyone.
Take care, everyone.
All right. See ya.